Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
I'm Kevin Bayuk, a partner and worker owner at Next Economy. My guest today is Lisa Kleissner. Lisa is the co-founder of the KL Felicitas Foundation and the Toniic Institute, amongst others, which I'll get to in a moment. And these organizations are really building a movement to bring down the barriers to impact investing while literally transforming how we define and create. Lisa has also co-founded Social Impact International and Hawaii Investment Ready, to name, again, amongst other organizations. Lisa's on the board of a number of organizations. You'll find, as we talk about Lisa's story, that there's a number of other efforts and initiatives that Lisa has worked on over the years. A lot of them having to do with building capacity and, like Hawaii Investment Ready, scaling the regional indigenous social enterprise infrastructure, which we'll talk about. Lisa's been an impact investor since impact investing was a thing. I know it's been a thing for a long time, but as a term, Lisa's been doing this since at least the year 2000. Lisa teaches, writes, and thinks about kind of the impact investment experience. Recently, we here at Next Economy had the pleasure of connecting with Lisa when she enrolled and completed the Next Economy MBA program. It was truly a delight to learn with and from Lisa throughout the 9-month learning journey. Always grateful and feel privileged to hear Lisa's whole systems perspective. And I believe that the listeners of Next Economy Now will also benefit from Lisa's insights and hearing about Lisa's work and what you're interested in. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Kevin. Thank you for this opportunity. And thanks for mentioning the MBA program. I hadn't thought about myself as being this expert coming in, but more I felt like I signed up for it because I wanted to fine tune and get updated and broaden my network of other professionals working in the space. And I got much more than that from the program. I want to congratulate all of you of that together. It's a unique opportunity in the space of learning about finance to actually go in a place where it's not just you and your team who are putting together the experiences and learnings from all these people in the impact space, but then also enabling us to meet with people across the globe and have a deep conversation about it. So thanks for that. You've definitely improved my own game in this. So thanks.
Definitely our pleasure and privilege to learn along with you and learn from you as well. So the first question, and it's always a challenging one because there's an edit, there's so much you could say. There's parts of your story that I've heard that really stand out to me. And so I'm curious if maybe you could share a little bit about your story, any one of the edits of maybe where you grew up or your background in architecture, the journey through tech, or how you and Charlie got into impact investing, any pieces of that you feel would be helpful for listeners to know one arc. And I know it's only one arc because we could be here for many, many days talking about the full journey, but I'm wondering if there's any threads that you want to pull on just to give us some context as we go further into the conversation.
Sure. I do think growing up on an island definitely had a big part in even why I studied architecture, right? I grew up in Hawaii at a time when life was fairly simple. We didn't have locks on the doors. We didn't have shoes on our feet, thank God. Shoes were a bit of a rude awakening at the age or in 7th grade. I had to wear them. But I got to witness this shift in the natural environment from being something that supported us to something that we personally were impacting in a negative way. And this happened I was born in the 50s, and in the 60s, Hawaii decided that they needed to monetize the natural assets of Hawaii, and they started to overhaul all of the land use designations. And this forced families off their land because they might have been in a place that was on a beautiful beach, and now they had to pay 10x tax to keep their house in that place. And so it really forced families out of Waikiki, for instance, and other beautiful areas, and forced development. And I think today we're seeing, the economic distractions of that, and we're certainly seeing the community impacts, not to mention what recently happened in Lahaina, which really, what happened in Lahaina is the result actually of things that started centuries ago, actually, that this shift in the way we used to live on the land and how we today are using that land in an economic way rather than as a support or living in harmony with the land. So I'm not going to go too far. I'm going to let you keep prompting me with questions.
Sure. Well, and maybe for listeners who don't know, so growing up in Hawaii, and at the time of this recording, there have been just catastrophic fires that have taken many lives and impacted so many people, including your family and relations. And maybe even more tragically, or just in the tragic context of our time, it's not your first time being involved with fire and its impact on community. And listeners may not know that you and Charlie have resided in Big Sur. And part of your life journey, there's so many threads we could pull on here, but one of the times we connected, and I don't think it was the first time we met, we might have met at a SOCAP event. The first time we really connected was talking about this idea of the importance of resilience in land use and community. And those are all things that require a whole system of connections and interactions. And one thing that characterizes, I think, your work in impact investing and philanthropy is this de-siloing or taking a whole systems approach. So I know there's a lot there, but if you want to mention any of the factual background of like your residence in Big Sur and any of the observations that you're seeing and connections you're seeing between different events in different places, including this most recent tragedy in Hawaii and Maui.
Well, so to pick up the thread from growing up in an island, seeing this transformation happen and how capital was transforming the landscape in front of me and the lives of the folks around me. And then I went and I studied architecture at UH Manoa, not because I wanted to be an architect, but because I saw waste management as a real issue in Hawaii growing up. In fact, the canal that we lived on, which was blue-green with a sand spit in it when I grew up, was now brown because at the end of it, they built a dock. And so now we're seeing, really getting directly impacted our family and the quality of our life. And so I wanted to actually get into waste management. And they said, well, the closest thing would be to become an architect. You can influence the design of the buildings. So in an odd way, it ended up actually being the right tool for me because it took me up out of Hawaii. And I was able to get out to Asia as an architect and take a look at what was going on in that economy. And one day I had the epiphany that I was going to change. I was actually going to leverage what I knew, and I was going to change my life to actually be more impactful. My degree, by the way, was in environmental design and architecture. So it was the early dates of looking at how architecture needs to critically think about its material use, solar, wind, managing wastewater, etc. So very early days of that. I would say one other thing is, you don't get rich doing architecture. At least you don't get rich doing it the way I was doing it, because I was always I was more interested in solving for community level issues than in designing something that I could point to and say, look what I designed. So it was really more look what we designed, right? And look at the problems we solved for the community within that structure. But what happened was there was a shift in my life that happened in 1999 where my husband and I had an opportunity I was working at that point in Silicon Valley as an architect, working for a lot of startups actually. And we came into quite a bit of money. We're not, either of us, my husband's family is teachers, and my family, we had a medical business, a small medical business that I worked in with my dad. And my dad actually is the one who taught me really about how you can connect economics and helping the community, the power of capital. In his business, if a client came in and he knew the client was not able to pay for the wheelchair that they really needed, my dad found a way to mauna wahi it to them. That's like give it to them. And so I learned that a business was a balancing act between the needs of the business and the needs of the community. But fast forward to Silicon Valley and the economic upside we had. We never thought of it as an economic upside to benefit us. We immediately thought of it as a huge responsibility. How are we going to steward this capital to do something different with it? Which perplexed all of our advisors and set us on a journey of impact investing. And that, when I first heard it or thought about, you didn't hear about impact investing in 2000, but the concept for me, I picked up when I was working. I donated a lot of services to different companies in Silicon Valley. And one of them happened to be the Community Foundation. And speaking with Peter Hero, I got this idea that maybe with the capital that we have, beyond having a foundation, maybe there's a way that we can invest that capital differently. So we started on that journey trying to figure it out. And for a long time, we were using the language of the current financial situation, or industry rather. And of course, that's all morphed in the 23 years that I've been doing this work. And I would say that the one thing, I'm 69 years old, so I've seen a bit. And I'm now being super reflective in my life since I just had that 69th birthday in July. And I've been thinking a lot about the 23 years that we've been, quote unquote, investing and investing. And I would say that I'm seeing more of the blind spots and the limitations of the work that we've done. And I would have trained in my life to question authority. Or maybe I trained myself to question authority. My dad might say that. But I'm questioning myself, and I'm questioning the things that we've done, my husband and I, that we did with good intention. We did with the idea of experimentation. Our peers have done it too. But I think what I've seen is that impact investing, well, first of all, been a bit co-opted by the run-of-the-mill traditional financial industry with ESG. We did move into something that we call deep impact. But I say still, even with a deep impact lens, and even with a gender lens, a diversity lens, all these different things that we do, it sort of begs the fundamental question about, or that capital is not the center of the universe. We and nature together are the center of the universe, and we are so out of whack with one another that I've been wondering how, what can I do, not just with my capital, but with my personal resources. And that's not a journey that started like yesterday. I began to wonder early on with capital when I started doing grant making. I realized the shortcomings of grants. And I realized that I had to play a deeper role, a personal role. I had to roll my sleeves up. I had to retool myself. And that oftentimes, the bigger contribution I could have was in listening, coming alongside, questioning, becoming sort of joining the effort on the ground to learn more about the whys of what was going on in order to understand the how we're gonna address this and fix it. And so today, when I look back at the 23 years of introducing capital into my impact life, because I think I had an impact life before I showed up with the capital, but the shift was that now I could get a check. I sometimes see the money as a distraction, but it's a necessary distraction.
Well, I might highlight, I think, for listeners who don't know some of the work that you have done in this, some amount of trailblazing in impact investing, again, which definitely has been co-opted, and you and I could critique kind of how it's emerged in a number of ways. And I hear you being very reflective with a lot of humility and grace context, which is really helpful. But I think listeners probably should know that one of the areas of innovation, and you mentioned peers, there are others, and it's not just you and Charlie, but you were early in this idea of like, okay, here's foundations that have a corpus. Sure, they're granting 5% a year, whatever the IRS mandates are for the type of foundation they have. Look at the asset base itself, and what is that invested in as you and I sit here today? For the majority of private foundations in the United States, at least, and maybe around the world, the majority of the assets are invested in public equity or some type of portfolio of business as usual, market rate return type investment vehicles. But you had a vision and took a stand for, and I think, I don't know if movement's the right word, but you definitely inspired a number of your peers to look at that full asset base and actually put it to work, at least in alignment with missions, what some people call mission-related investing or total portfolio activation, or I think you and Toniic created another terminology for it. But this idea of taking that asset and putting that to work for the outcomes that are also in alignment with the philanthropic or charitable or beneficial outcomes. I would still take a stand today that that's very, very important analysis because it's not yet done, meaning there's still a lot of money that's not being allocated towards things that are a benefit, even though they're public assets in the sense that they're charitable or they're designated as charitable. So I just want listeners to know, and like you can comment on how difficult that was or lessons learned, but people might not even know that you did that.
Well, so we weren't the first ones to do 100%. I would argue we were the first ones to recognize that philanthropy could do this. And why I say we weren't the first ones doing 100% is that there were developmental organizations that preceded us. Yeah. And I think also we were the first, call it private or non-institutional capital holders who were saying this is totally possible and you can still meet your return objectives. I would argue today that back then we pushed the envelope to prove that you could get comparable returns. Today, I wouldn't even try to do that because with deep impact and what we really want to get done, we're not looking at the financial returns as much as we're looking at the impact returns and then looking at how can we balance out the portfolio to make sure that we can still open the doors tomorrow and have capital that we can be putting back in the marketplace. So that means we're willing to take lower returns for more impact. And I think the term we use now is not, we use an appropriate return. And sometimes an appropriate return is no return. Oftentimes that's the case, particularly if we're experimenting in parts of the market that they're not capitalized enough and they really need grants ultimately, right?
That's another thing that some of the jargon has emerged where I started learning about integrated capital approaches to investing or supporting projects, and this idea of using grants where appropriate, lending where appropriate, maybe equity investments, and building a blended kind of integrated stack of capital either for one particular initiative or a series of initiatives. And then I had learned of it as something that was new or newer, and I guess it's because it's still not super common. However, in conversation with you, I'm like, oh, you've been doing that for a while, this territory that you had already covered.
So that was the purview of development banks. They were doing quite a bit of that, right? Structuring with different types of capital, with different return expectations. But private, looks like us, smaller capital was not doing that, but we could be, right? And John Kohler wrote a really interesting paper that looked at blended capital. What does a vertical stack look like and what does a horizontal stack look like? And that really influenced my thinking on we can do this. We just need to bring together the stakeholders who are now very siloed in how they're investing in the initiatives and programs and companies and bring them together at the front end. And we look at the capital continuum for that company and we right size the capital over the horizon of the impact that we want to help that company achieve. Right. And if it's about getting them to sustainability, cash flow break even, then whatever mix of capital to do that. If they're already there and we want to scale them, what's the mix of capital to do that? And so I think that was a bit of an innovation to be doing it at that scale, smaller scale. I'm still doing that today, and I'm doing that with our own capital, our philanthropic capital, all the way to our market. And we have 3 or 4 different investment entities we use to do that. But more than just our own capital, because, you always experiment. All scientists, good scientists experiment on themselves first, right?
Yeah.
and then they go to their friends and family and say, okay, so this kind of work, do you want to join in? So that's where Toniic came in, right? Yeah. I think the next push is it's been the journey over the 23 years has really been predominantly with private capital. But I'm realizing with my work in Hawaii, we have to pull in government philanthropy and the private sector. We have to work collaboratively, all of us. It's because a lot of the issues that we're particularly looking at Lahaina, that is going to have to absolutely, to pull that community back together, it's going to have to be a collaboration between all three. And it's going to be longitudinal, it's going to be generational. There's a lot about that it really, to me, speaks to the journey I've been on in impact investing and deeper impact around community work that I do. So
I would say that was another theme that I resonate with from your work is just said earlier, whole systems, but the de-siloing, right? And so it's not just form of capital or source of capital or even terms or type of capital. The other thing I've seen you do, and maybe you could speak about your work in Hawaii, is, for example, you told me about the way you looked at food systems. So some impact investors might invest in a company, right? And they might realize that a company fits in a value chain, they say, or a value exchange or a value continuum. And there's things that are downstream and things that are upstream. And there are different types of communities and institutions and entities in this continuum. But many impact investors still invest in a company, and they might try and right-size the capital stack for, the life cycle of that entity. But what you did was look at, okay, well, for this company, for any initiative, for the impact to happen, it's not about this one company. You did an analysis and facilitated analysis, which I think is the more impressive part, to be honest, is to facilitate an awareness of like, hey, there's a number of stakeholders that are involved in making this impact happen. And it's going to require not just one institution, but a plurality of organizations and certainly communities and the other touch points. And that investment in different places can move it along, but it's actually the awareness that allows for that impact to happen. Because if that whole set of things did not happen, if those silos maintained, then the impact would not occur, or to the extent it would be compromised in some way.
Exactly.
So maybe can you share about how you came to that?
The epiphany around that one. So it was the recognition, first and foremost, that, initially working just in the private sector, realizing, no, I need to understand better government because they have a lot of money. and philanthropy, I already work in philanthropy, but I consider my philanthropy, I work at it as a private individual doing it. It's not institutional. And so COVID hits, right? And we were going to do a CAP scan. This was inspired from Oregon, actually. Oregon did a CAP scan to help small growing businesses identify sources of capital. Very different intentionality for their report. And at first we were going to do that until I started to look at the system and I realized that didn't make sense for Hawaii. What we really needed to do is kind of go back to the drawing board and look at who are the different actors putting capital in the system. What is their intentionality about the capital they put in? What are the structures, the shape it's taking? How are they deciding on that structure versus another structure? So that's kind of the design part of it. And then, in fact, what's happening when they hit the market? Is it staying the same? Is it having the impact that they want it to have? Are the folks who need that capital, does it align with what their needs are? Right? So we interviewed 48 active funders in food systems in Hawaii across government, philanthropy, the private sector. We selected 24 enterprises, nonprofit and for-profit, across the value chain spectrum, or you had a couple different terms, in the food system, across all the islands. And then with that results, we crunched the numbers. We've put out the first report, which is focused on the funders. And what we learned was that actually folks that teed up products and structures, when they hit the market, they didn't fit the market. So then the products so we analyzed almost 800 transactions, individual transactions. What did the structure look like? The impact, and everybody got to talk about it. This was a lot of work, but the bottom line was the products didn't fit the market. So then the banks or the private individuals or government had to tweak the products to fit the market. So we had two pictures, product facing the market and the actual product used. And the problem with that is a lot of people didn't even try to get capital because they're looking at the product and they're going, that does not fit me. I'm not going to even try to get it. But those who were brave enough to hit the system and then challenge the system and get it iterated to fit, then they were fine. So we thought this is an opportunity now. We can show this to the marketplace so the market can start to iterate its product. And that's what's happening. So now, not only are they looking at their product individually, but they're also looking collectively, like if that's the product you have and I have this product, and if we put the two together on a deal, we can do the deal because one is taking off the risk that enables the other to come on board. We can do that. We were part of a consortium who helped a distributor of purely local production food in Hawaii raise $6 million successfully. And they were at a point where they needed that $6 million in order to break through to the next level of growth. And they were having a difficult time in the market trying to find the right instrument, and creating that blended capital structure. They were able to successfully do that. So, and we're working on more examples of that. So there is a kind of what people think they want, and then there's really what the reality is of the marketplace, and there is a middle point that we can go to, all of us, to really do the appropriate investments and the appropriate returns that the communities need.
Well, I've heard you tell me before once that architecture is, which you got into, like you described, is a good fit for your interest because it's a dance between data and art. I heard you say that once. And this theme of like getting the data and then there's an art of facilitating the whole system's understanding. But I've seen it in a number of places in your work, just to name a couple. In Toniic, it's not just creating this community and this global organization essentially to connect peers for learning and advancing impact investment, but you actually said, let's get the data. Let's open up our portfolios. Let's share. Let's understand. And you've produced a number of studies through the T100 reports, which you showed me. And then even just mentioning it like in Big Sur, coming back there, you mentioned a story to me not too long ago about that there's also data gathering was something that became really important for creating a stewardship plan. And I was wondering, I see this throughout a lot of your work, is like not being afraid to look at the data. And then the art comes in of like, how do you utilize that data to inform change and transform minds and activities and behaviors. But maybe you want to share how that theme shows up, or maybe the Big Sur example. Why data? I mean, I get it, and I see the evidence of its impact, but I'm curious.
It's the old quantitative, qualitative. But I actually think that was one of the big challenges in the financial markets is the narrative is very much data-driven, but not qualitative-driven. Right. So if we were, imagine what it would look like if the stock market report was, the high today is this, and this one is impacted, and we're having a rush on the market, and this family in Hoboken, New Jersey, just lost their jobs, and this is the impact on that family as a result of the market rate movement. So now you have this personal narrative that demonstrates what the numbers are doing. But if you just have the personal narrative without the numbers, then you don't connect that thing to a broader set of things going on in a community that are impacting it. And it can work both ways. You can use it to bolster your argument about the problem, quantify it. You can also use it to quantify the impact that you're having to address it, right? So both sides of that equation. And it's been a game changer for us in Big Sur, for instance. We shifted from just being disaster relief ready for fires to we applied for a CAL FIRE grant, which we successfully received. And because we had data, we had quantitative, qualitative data from all the campaign fires and experience with the community to successfully, it's a $550,000 grant. That's over 5 years, which is a significant grant. And what's that money for? That money is for us to work within the neighborhoods of Big Sur to build fire resilience, turn them into FireWise communities, working on infrastructure, economics, all of those things, right? So we're able to bring on a new employee who's perfect. He's a community member. He's schooled himself in this. And so we're taking a preemptive approach to this now. And we're doing the same thing with tourism, right? We've had a lot of impacts from over-tourism in Big Sur. So we did the same thing with data. We collected data. We use actually a tool. It's an iPhone. It's Aina is the name of the product. It was designed by a graduate of Hawaii Investment Ready, one of our accelerator companies. And he lives in Kula, Maui, which is, by the way, the epicenter of the fire right now that is 60% contained. We use that because you can collect data off grid, and he basically configures it for us so that whatever, like if we're collecting hotspot data on tourism, we can do that. If we're collecting illegal campfires, that's also a part, and it uploads it and it puts it into graphics for us, and then we present the graphics to the county. And every time we've put data in combination with story, it's like the 1-2 punch. It's very hard for folks to look the other way and not do something and get involved. So
it makes me think about the planning effort now. As they say, planning is best done in advance, right? And so given that there's probably no place on Earth right now where there won't be some catastrophic experience, in part due to what we've done in terms of the impact on our atmosphere of global warming and the disruption of climate patterns, that the lessons you're learning in Big Sur and lessons in this case like how to facilitate transformation, the changing of hearts and minds, and then taking action for anticipatory planning, communities of resilience, how translatable that effort is going to be, tragically, to Maui and then to some of the other places. Yeah.
Is that government has its eye on certain types of data and certain types of narratives, and it's from their bureaucratic perspective. And when you also go out and spend the time, and we purchased a traffic counter because there was anecdotal data about the traffic on the highway and on Highway 1, but they didn't really know. They took 1 day or 2 day data, and then they just said, okay, we're just going to average that over the year. Well, that's not how it works. And so we have to invest in the tools to collect data, but then we also have to look at the data that's already collected and ask ourselves what's missing. What is not being represented in this? And I think with diverse communities, the answer to that question is a big one. And I don't think it's about us waiting for them to collect the data or pick the right things to collect. I think we collectively we know what it is that we need to figure out. Well, we should experiment with it and give it a go and see if we come up with data that really is telling the story or telling us a story that we didn't even know was there. It was a surprise story. But I do think there's a role today with the tools and technology that communities can take these things into their own hands in a good way and approach the governmental bodies to partner with them, not work at odds with them. So our goal isn't to show up the government. It's really to say, hey, we want to help. We've got money. We want to help solve this problem, and we can do it best together. So that's our strategy in Hawaii. That's our strategy in Big Sur, and so far so good.
And, I've heard you say like this qualitative piece of having people see themselves in the data becomes really important for the motivation for change and action. And certainly having this multiplicity of stakeholders involved, even leveraging capital, like despite our overcorrection towards capital as a society, it's still a tool today that can be part of the equation for change. But you mentioned at the outset that we're seeing the limitations to that. Capital might have a role, but a lot of this is going to come down to communities and resilience and organizing together.
So one thing I often tell the social entrepreneurs in our course when they first start, I say, the problem is not money. Actually, people with money need you more than you need them. The challenges are absorption, the right structure for the money. And they don't believe me, of course. They're like, just show me how to get more money. I just need more money for my enterprise. And I'm like, no. You need to do some deep work on inside your personal self, inside with your team, with the structure of your company, to really deeply understand what the opportunity is for you. And I said, when you do that work and you go to the market, it's going to be about picking and choosing the money you want. And that is, I can't tell you how many graduates come back and they go, you're absolutely right. I didn't think it was that way. But people with money that particularly like philanthropy, they want to make sure that money is going to have impact. And when you do the deep work and you go to the market, demonstrating that you're able to measure it and you understand it and you're connected and you have the right relationships and the right structure of your company, it's a lot easier to scale your company and get the capital you need. Yeah.
And what more would you say about, maybe people don't know, you have the accelerator, the investment ready, you've been involved in capacity building and training and educational initiatives. Is there anything more you want to say about that aspect of your work? I mean, it's evident in what you just shared, but is there any other things that you found are important for this kind of capacitance, providing capacitance for social entrepreneurs, things that stand out to you?
Well, I think the work we're doing right now is the result of having started. So back in the early 2000s, we started an accelerator in India because we realized if we wanted to do impact investing and we really were interested in small and growing business, there was not a lot of deal flow. And we wanted to go to a place where the social issues were huge and the innovation we figured would also be there, and also had to speak English so that we could at least communicate with them. We since then we flipped to the other side, right? Formed Toniic and brought together folks that were, we'll call it, inclined already. We're already questioning the financial system. We're interested in impact. and then started doing capacity building there. And there it's a peer-to-peer capacity building, but I'd also argue on the entrepreneur side, we realized that when you bring them together, even if they're not in the same sector, in fact, the diversity helps, that they learned so much from one another. We learned so much from them. And every time we would do any sort of so-called teaching, learning, we were learning as much, if not more, with the folks who were assembled in the room. So what was missing in all of this is, of course, these two parties were never connected, right? So philanthropists, impact investors are looking at deal flow and going in very siloed into making their investments. And the folks who are in the trenches are very siloed because they have their heads down and they're just trying to keep the doors open day in and day out, right? And so having this broader conversation took some time. There was issues around competition and time sink and all these other things. But I think today people do see the value in it, and that it does further their individual mission when they further the collective mission. And we're seeing this particularly in Hawaii, where we've brought government philanthropy, the private sector, together with the food system cohort in the same room to have this important conversation. And I think, for Lahaina, it's going to be the same type of conversation, only they're going to be, there's capital being thrown at solving the current crisis for them. There's capital being thought about the longitudinal. A price tag has been put on by FEMA of about $6 billion to rebuild Lahaina. The local community is saying, we're not sure we want to even, maybe some of us don't want to build it where it was. Maybe climate change means we need to move it up Malka a little bit more. Up Malka is more in the mountains. So there's all these actors in the system, and there's capital that's going to trigger where it lands. It's going to trigger certain things that are going to flame up, to use a metaphor, and it's going to cause other things to die down unless we collectively find a clearinghouse methodology to channel or place. And I've been talking to a few people about capital that wants to come in. Can we park it somewhere? Because right now there's no absorption for it, but there will be absorption in 1, 2, 3 years to move it. And so this is the dance that the communities and people who are working in impact are having with the capital market right now, particularly in places where you have crisis happening. And there's a role for impact investors who want a market rate return. There's a role for philanthropists who want a pure impact return. There's a role for people in the concessionary department. We need all of those types of capital to move from where Lahaina is today to where it needs to be tomorrow. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But that's what we need, right? Is the community self-determined vision of where all our places need to be. But talking about this now, when there's catastrophic loss of life and property, and then still people today without their needs met, hunger and food and shelter, it's such a recent tragedy. And yet there's this moment where potentially billions of dollars capital be mobilized for some form of rebuild recovery, and then who gets to say what, where. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say, is if we had this multiplicity of stakeholders involved in that determination, we might find something that's designed to be resilient, designed to be anticipatory of things like sea level rise or extreme events of different types. Something maybe that's resilient from an economic perspective in terms of, So
I actually was speaking to someone who wanted to do something in regen ag and had a vision. This is money coming in. And I said, well, here are some of the challenges with that thinking. There's no economic model that would support great what you want to do, but it's not going to deliver up an economic model that works. So I think that we need to reverse strategy this, and that's go in or reverse engineer, have you talk to a few boots on the ground ag companies so you can see what they're doing to be resilient. There are examples already. Let's leverage that. Let's not try to come in from the outside, and it's a combination of the two, right? Some things have to be done differently, but we can find the seeds of innovation and thought leadership already in the community. We don't have to go to Timbuktu to find that.
Right. It's right there. It's embedded, likely. Draw out strengths and then share with other places that have any similar dynamic of rebuild, recovery, or anticipatory design, because that's our opportunity is there's no place on the globe probably that won't experience
I was
level
just
of
thinking the same
transformation.
thing, that there's no place on the globe that isn't going to be going through the same conversation over some natural or unnatural disaster, as I call this one. And the question is, are we going to, as humanity, be ready to drop our egos and be present with our fellow citizens to craft that solution that is beneficiary for everybody, including the natural environment? Right? Or is it going to be something intergalactic that gets shoved down people's throats? Or in the case just in Lahaina, already people are circling saying, oh, your house burned down, can I buy your lot from you? Right? So the predatory nature of what happens when you have a natural disaster. And I think anyone who's been through that knows that they're the first people to come in, the people who are going to take from the community, even in the time of dire need right now. Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah.
But fortunately,
that's
a small number of people, and right now the Lahaina people are totally on it, and they're going to run them out of town, I'm sure. So, yeah.
Yeah, but vigilance will be needed because, like you're saying, capital, if not a distraction, in some cases it's the predator. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Yeah, so many lessons, right? So many things in your life journey, looking at seeing the wanton waste, which still happens in all sorts of sectors of our economy, and then finding that dance of data through architecture, and then moving some of that work and that dance into capital, recognizing the silos, breaking down the silos, this decolonial, desiloing work to reconnect different parts to make impact happen with a focus on the impact and not being distracted by the capital. That's a courageous set of choices, because any one of those places you could have opted out for something different, but you've kept on it, which I'm really grateful for.
So I'm going to reference a very powerful book that I read that I would recommend to anyone listening to read. It's called Hawaiki Rising, and it's written by Sam Lowe, who's, like I am, part Hawaiian, but he lives in Martha's Vineyard. And it's basically a coming-of-age story, but it's the true story of the hokulea from the beginning of when hokulea is a sailing canoe that was built or designed exactly as the sailing canoes were back in the day when the Hawaiians were sailing between Tahiti and Hawaii. And they did it to prove that it was real, because you can see these sailing ships in the etchings from Captain Cook that captured it back then in their photography, and to prove that, in fact, this was a viable form of transportation. And of course, right now they're circumnavigating the Pacific area, and I think they're heading to Seattle here shortly. But in the process of telling that story, he recounts a story where Nainoa, who is the head of this whole process, and he's going to be the head navigator to take them down to Tahiti. And he's been trained by Mao, a Pulag, who was one of the last people in the Pacific who knew how to navigate by the stars. And so Nainoa has been studying, and they're like a week or two away from launching the canoe. And so Mao says to him, okay, so close your eyes. Can you see the island? And he closes his eyes and he says, I think I can see the island. And Mao says, and I'm paraphrasing, it's super important that you, in your mind, you see the island. That's the most important thing. And so they get on the boat or the canoe, the va'a, and they're heading down there. And all the way, Nainoa is kind of second guessing his ability to do this. And he's nervous, and he keeps asking Mao, is that the right decision? And Mao is like, doesn't say a word. He's silent, absolutely silent. They get to where they've been like a certain number of weeks underway, and they should, in theory, be close to their goal. And Nainoa sees a bird, and there's more indicators than the stars. There's also the currents and the debris in the ocean and animals, birds. So he sees this bird, and he says out loud that he thinks it's this and that they need to change direction. And that was the first time that Mao said, that bird is not going to sea, that bird is going back to land. And at that point, he knew that they were in the right direction, and they made landfall as a result. One other piece about this too is when the Polynesians, when they would approach an island, they didn't say that they were going to sail to an island. They said that they were throwing a fish hook and pulling the island up out of the sea, right? That was the way their mind interpreted the process of sailing. I actually think these stories are metaphors for the work that we're all doing, right? And all the uncertainty, like with impact investing, when are we doing the right thing? Are we doing more harm than good? Is this experiment going to fail? Is it going to be successful? I think we have to we have to hold on to the vision of this world, this imperfect world we're in, about the world that we want. We have to hold it no matter what. And we may not get there in a straight line, right? But I think the vision, for me, the thing I understand most from working with entrepreneurs around the world is that those who are able to hold on to their vision and be flexible about the path, they get there, right? Flexible not only about the path, but even a little bit about the vision, that the vision iterates along with the path. Yeah.
So there's a commitment and a humility.
Yes. And yet each of us has our own net that we're throwing out, our own fish hooks that we're using to do that collective emergence of the island, that metaphorical island in front of us. So, yeah.
I see that in your work, Lisa. I do, that commitment, that humility, the pulling up the island, putting your hooks in, navigating, sensing and responding to what's emergent. That's not an easy thing to do. But again, I'm really grateful. We're really grateful for the work you are doing, have done, continue to do. And really grateful for you making time. Next Economy Now listeners, I know they're going to enjoy this journey, and we'll find time to catch up again, I'm sure, to go deeper. I'd feel remiss if I didn't say anything about, because this tragedy in Hawaii is so recent and it's touched members of your community, your family. Is there anything that we should know as listeners when we get this published? Is there people might be asking, as they naturally will, like, what can I do? And I'm sure there's lots of different answers that you might say, like, well, make sure you're preparing for your own community because, like we said earlier, it's going to happen everywhere. But is there anything in particular that comes to mind if somebody listening is asking that question that you might be able to help them?
So I learned from my own community in Big Sur that after a serious fire, the one thing that none of the agencies, the government, philanthropy, community foundation, nonprofits that are on the front line, what they cannot do is they can't press money into the hand of the person impacted. They can give them a card to Target, a card to the supermarket, right, like a credit card. But often these folks who've lost everything, they need some flexibility, I'd say it's like to feel like they're still part of the real world, that they actually have some capital in their back pocket. And so the one thing that we do in Big Sur is when we have that, we immediately start writing checks to the people that are impacted. And since we know the community, right, our board members are distributed, so we were able to vet and make sure it gets to the right people. There is one org in Hawaii that has that relationship with the community, and it's called Maui United Way. I'm not a big fan of large philanthropies, but this is a philanthropy that is boots on the ground. I've spoken to Nicholas, and I was eager to find out who it was. It's the organization that our foundation is actually providing a gift to, and it's the organization I'm encouraging my philanthropic and impact investing friends to give to, because they have that relationship and they are writing checks to people. And they're doing it in a really cool way. So every family member gets the same amount. So it's not like just one amount for a family, but so larger families will have more capital to help with making some of their own choices rather than simply having to take what they are handed at the distribution centers. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you for that. And thank you for making time to share some piece of your story and your wonderful work. Any last words for the Next Economy Now listeners?
Mahalo nui. That means thank you very much in Hawaiian.
Perfect. Well, with that, till we talk again.
Okay. Take care, Kevin. Aloha.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Before you go, we wanted to let you know that our spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on March 26th. If you're an entrepreneur seeking to create a business that works for all life, a member of a team looking to transition your organization into one that is more regenerative and democratic, or someone who's considering a career or livelihood transition and embodiment with your values, we designed this course for you. Over this 9-month learning journey, you'll have the chance to learn practical skills around business and life design based on our work with over 250 social enterprises. In addition to live sessions, you can deepen your experience and practice with special sessions, affinity groups, and connections with over 500 alumni who have participated in the course. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro with one of our facilitators. If you're ready to sign up, you can use the code PODCASTMBA to save 10% on tuition. We hope you'll join us.